is because all the days are blurring together, of course. Um, but thank you for joining us. This is going to be kind of a casual brainstorming session, specifically geared toward DMGMs, game masters that are running games. So my name's Carolyn. I'm the other Carolyn, not Carolyn. No, the joke is I'm Carolyn. Yes, I run the Learn a Board game once a month, but when it was at Woodburn. So you've seen me there if you've seen me there. Um, I've been in the RPG world for about 10 years or so, on and off, playing and running games, running a couple of different sessions, mostly in Pathfinder and D&D. I haven't yet branched out to some of the other modules or the other game systems. But the problem that I have is that I am very creative and I think of a ton of ideas and I don't have time or energy or players in order to run these ideas. So I wanted to help you guys out. Um, and the best way I could think of doing that was to kind of figure out how I can get my brain into your guys' brain. So that was where this idea kind of came from. Um, so the goal of this is we're going to go through a bunch of different brainstorming exercises, different ways to find inspiration, different ways to think about things. I'll use a bunch of examples from my own experience, but we'll basically just go through a bunch of different exercises and get your brains churning and such. I do encourage you to write down or type your ideas. You'll never know, you might come up with something that you want to use in a game. It's nice to have a reference to go back to. It's always easier to build off of an existing list, to build off of something versus starting blank, versus starting with a blank page. So I definitely encourage you to write down or type or have, follow along. You won't need to talk in this. Questions can be put in the chat. Probably what we'll do is have you put like a letter Q and then have your question, and we'll have like 15 minutes at the end for Q&A and general chat and things like that. And please share your responses. As we go through these exercises, go ahead and type those in the chat so everybody can kind of see what everybody else is doing, build off of each other. Of course, you don't have to share if you don't want to, but that way you don't have to worry about coming off of mute. And we are dealing with a little bit of background noise here. No problem, we'll work through it. Again, we're just gonna be pretty casual about all of this. And one final thing, this is my perspective. This is how I do stuff. This is how I brainstorm. By no means does this have to be what you do. Um, the idea with GMing is do what you're passionate about. Your players can tell when you're not excited about stuff, and they are more engaged and they're more interested, and the story is more interesting itself when you yourself are excited about it. When you've built this puzzle room and it's really great, and they can see that and they get excited too. Granted, they might bypass the room and fix it and break it or whatever and get through in like 5 minutes, and you expected them to take an hour and a half. It happens, but that enthusiasm comes through with your ideas. So definitely stretch yourself to think outside the box, but you'll always want to play to something that you're excited about, because your players will be able to tell with that. So let's see here. Let's do this. I'm going to next page, introductions. That's what I look like at work. And our first task, order in all things. So I had you take the last letter of your last name and put a character name with that. So at this time, I want you to count the number of syllables in that name. And I'm just going to put you guys into groups. You're not going to work together. You're not going to kind of get into a group team building thing. This is just to give you guys limited selections to kind of force you to think in a certain way. So if the name you came up with has one syllable, you're in group one. If your name has 2 or 3 syllables, you're in group 2. If your name has 3 or more syllables, you are in group 3. So just make a note of that. So as we go through and I'm having you do these exercises, you know which section of links or things to pull from. So brainstorm. I decided it was a large aberration. I didn't think it was a construct. I actually had to think about that for a little bit. And I say it's a CR3 or 18, depending on who your character is that's dealing with it. Some people like me, I love brainstorming. I love coming up with ideas. Other people, it's really difficult, and that's okay. That's why we're all here, is to practice and work on it. But I wanted to talk through a few main traits about brainstorming, a few things to keep in mind as we go through this and as you do it in your own time. First thing is quantity, not quality. Quality will come later. The building it deeper, That'll come later. If you have an idea like, oh, that's really good, just start it and keep going. Think of ideas, just keep naming them, just off the top of your head, just keep going, whatever comes to mind. Part of this seminar is to help you think creatively. So when you're building your world, you're building your characters, you're thinking things outside of the box, you're doing all this stuff, that's great. But there's also that moment when you're at the table and you have 6 players sitting there and they go, so what else is in the shop? And you have to answer. And you don't have anything pre-assembled. And you have to think right then and there, what else is in the shop? You could say nothing. You could say shop stuff. Or you could just start spewing ideas. So we're going to be doing these exercises with a bit of a timed aspect. I will be timing like 30 seconds, 1 minute. One, I want to make sure we get through everything. And two, this is have maybe 4 or 5 or more, then build off of some of them. So apologies if I suddenly go on mute. I just want to make sure we're all okay. Them afterwards. You want to just keep working on coming up with ideas, because a lot of times that's the stopping point for people, is just getting those initial ideas going. A lot of people can expand on stuff, but coming up with the ideas initially, think about quantity first, and we'll talk about quality later. So the next part is no such thing as bad ideas, and that's 100% true. You can say whatever you want and you own it. So you say, oh, what's the temple shaped like? And you're like, it's a sphere, because you're panicking and you have no idea what else to say. Right? The temple's a sphere. And your players are like, it's a sphere? Well, that sounds dumb. They're like, that's because that's what the shape of their god is. They literally think their god is a sphere. In fact, marbles is banned in that town, the game of marbles. That okay, that's kind of interesting. Wait a second, their deity is not a living creature, it's literally a sphere. So now are your players going to encounter that later on? Is it banned in that town to have circles? Like, that builds and builds, even when you're like, oh, that was a really stupid idea. Own it. Own it and make it something, make it important. In the horror world, one of the scariest characters that's been around traumatizing towns for 50 years, his name's Michael. Like, ideas can be anything as long as you put effort behind them. You put meaning to them, you give them context, you give them value. So your initial idea might be, okay, this sounds dumb. Then take the dumb idea and make it something really interesting, and then that becomes much more memorable for your players as well. There's a random servant named Stephen, like, okay, great. Well, when it finds out later that Stephen kidnapped the queen, like, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait, Stephen's not boring anymore. This is really interesting. Make those dumb ideas and build off of them and make them interesting. Challenge yourself to do that. So building on the ideas, asking why does that matter? So that's quality within the quantity. You'll be making your list and some things will jump out at you. You'll immediately go, oh, that branches and that, oh, that could be a thing and that could be a thing. And immediately you're building off of your ideas. Absolutely do that. You're going to work on that in this seminar a bit. We'll be asking why and getting into those deeper layers. Thinking outside the box, this ties in a bit with the quality as well. So you're coming up with these ideas normally, and then you start to twist them and think about them differently. I love kind of thinking in opposites, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But two of my favorite concepts is working with themes and working specifically with opposites. So taking a general idea and then twisting it, making something unexpected for your players, that can go a long ways, and it also saves you a bit of time. Instead of trying to expand on the known concept, you say, okay, what's the opposite? And it makes things a bit easier for you. So on that note, we're going to do something unexpected. Miss Carolyn, if you could put those lists in. I gave you guys lists of words. And I gave you 3 words and asked you to put descriptions for that. So if Carolyn could put those in the chat, kind of grouping the words together. And I want you, whether you're in group 1 has farmhouse, group 2 has, Carolyn, hi.
Hi, sorry, that was the first one, is the farmhouse. I forgot to, I didn't quite get the word first.
No, that's okay. So group 1 has farmhouse, group 2 has desert, group 3 has paladin. And I'm actually going to bounce over there for a second. Let's kind of take a look at what we're looking at. I want you to think of a place, a person, an item that is called that word, but doesn't use those descriptions. So think of how something could be called a farmhouse, but is not associated with cows. It's not abandoned. It's not dilapidated. It's not countryside. It's not cozy. Think of something that's a desert, or would be called a desert, but it's not dry, sweltering, hot, bleak, barren. I'm going to give you guys a minute to kind of work through that. Again, take your word, create it. It could be an object, a place, a person, a spell. You could even use some of the descriptions, so maybe it's a nickname because it's similar, but just don't make the exact item. So I'm going to put a timer up, and I'm going to switch up my screen so you guys can see the timer. But I'm going to go on mute, and we'll give 1 minute, start jotting down ideas, and if you'd like to share in chat, please do, and then I'll go through a few examples.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to move this to the side. All right, farmhouse is our first one. So looking at this list, a lot of times when I'm doing this, I'll have the word, and then I'll kind of, what's the core of it? How do you keep the essence of it and not have all these extra pieces? So point blank, my brain goes, farmhouse, that's where all the farmers' boys go. So in this town, there is a huge military presence, and all of the farmers have to have their sons join the army. So the farmhouse is the nickname for the building where all the new recruits go, because it's always full of farmers' sons. So then you start asking whys. And depending on what you're looking for is the direction you go. So one is, what does that say about the town? Well, the town has a strong military presence. It is mandatory to be in the military. How do the town people feel about that? How do the town feel if how would the town people feel if warriors, i.e. your players, suddenly walked in? Are they threatened by that? Um, do they need something from the players because their military is this way? What does that do for the farms? If all the sons have been mandatory to join the army, then all of the daughters are running the farm. So what does that look like? How does that change the world? If you're a family out in the farm, you don't want a firstborn son, you want a firstborn daughter because your son is going to be often going to war. Or maybe it's an honor thing, Mulan style, and you're like, oh, I do want a son to be represented. Then you think about, what are the characters there? Who's the son who's hiding from the military draft and pretending to be a woman? Who is the son that joined the military? His family farm got destroyed, and now he hates, the military style. That could be a fantastic villain. And where better to have a villain plant themselves than inside the military, rising up the ranks, and then suddenly he flips out and turns against everybody. So what you're doing as when you're building these worlds and these ideas is you make kind of a kaleidoscope. This is all coming from the center idea of a farmhouse. I got the center idea. I'm building on that. Build the world, build the world, build the world. Just give yourself kind of broad brushstrokes and then clue in on what you as a DM need. Do we need a character? So pull from that. If you need a plot point, pull from that. Is there a magic item you're trying to get your guys to, your players to interact with, or you want them to find? Where would that be found in this world? Once you kind of get that baseline kaleidoscope, just from a few questions of asking yourself, how does this world look? You can pull from quite a few different areas. So then maybe a second example would be with the desert. A desert that's not dry, sweltering, hot, bleak, or barren. My first thought is another building that is full of large jars of sand, because that is how teleportation works in this town. Is they take sand from around the world, they make a circle of sand, and then that's how teleportation works. I have no idea. and that's an idea. I would write that down and then I would move on. Something else with a desert that's not dry or sweltering, some type of a water desert that the players would have to cross where there's no land. It's called the desert because it's a kind of a Bermuda Triangle type of thing where they have to sail across, but no one's ever made it. They call it the wet desert. Something like that. Thinking of a spell that takes the idea of a desert and applies that to a person, turning them into a dry corpse, making it so they can't taste, breathe, And then you can pull that with your players. If the player has this desert spell cast on them or this desert poison, they drink it, something like that, you can describe very clearly the symptoms because you know what a desert is. And you don't even have to call it the desert poison, but in your mind, you're like, oh, it's the desert poison. So they're going to feel hot. They're going to feel dry. They're going to want water. They're not going to be able to talk. They're going to start, sweating a bunch. And you can very easily describe that in front of your players because you're pulling from stuff that you already know. So that concept I love a lot. I love twisting things. I had a game recently where my players went into a random town. They went to the bar. Of course, they went to the tavern. Of course, they did. They ordered a drink. The bartender said it'll be 1G. They put down a piece of gold. The guy looked at the currency and said, I don't know what this is. I asked for a G. Are you guys from out of town? And he suddenly got really suspicious. Little twists like that. Some people don't like it. Again, that's my kind of style, is to throw those type of things in to make things different when it's appropriate. You obviously don't want to trick your players if they're already having a tough time, and you as a GM, as a DM, will figure that out as you run more games and as you play them yourself, right? So moving on. So that was our do something unexpected. Next, we're going to talk about muses. Actually, the rest of it, we're going to be talking about muses a bit. My first muse is music itself. I love listening to music and using it as reference. 90% of my ideas comes from leveraging music. So we're going to have a couple of examples here. So group one, I have yours. These are all just YouTube links. So within your group, choose one of those links. I'll give you guys about a minute. So just pick a link and try to stick with it because I want you to kind of listen to the song and feel the song and then come up with ideas from it. So try to just pick one and stick with it and try to get ideas from it instead of bouncing around. The links are all there. You can go through them all later. But I want you to specifically think of a character. Specifically, let's think about a character like an NPC or a villain or a side hero that they're going to interact with, inspired from the song that you pick and listen to. So I'm going to put on the timer. I'll give a minute with a little bit extra. So go ahead and start listening and brainstorming that. I could talk about this all day, but I'm going to try to go through quicker. So group one, I actually grouped these songs. So group one has more TV movie type music. That first link is a group called Two Steps from Hell. They originally started making trailer music. So a lot of their music is very action and forward driven and mysterious and stuff you would hear in movie trailers. And then they started making their own CDs. Sky World is one of theirs that is fantastic, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's basically music. If you were living in or exploring a sky world, this is what it would sound like. So very cool group. The next song I have there is Americana. That's from a little known TV show called Supernatural. That song is a very cool character song. There's a sadness to it. There's a lore to it. There's a experience. So listening to that song for me, it would be like an old war veteran, like a captain of the guard who's retired that the PCs run into, that has a lot of experience. It has a bit of melancholy, has a bit of sadness, it has a bit of memory to it. That third song is one of my favorites from the Transformers movies. I find music everywhere, and I would not turn up my nose at this one. This is another forward motion. It feels like a caravan moving across the desert. This is a group of Templars that are traveling, and your character is one of them, and it's about they're connected to their group, but they're moving and migrating to this new kind of location, and it's these wide shots of the group, not so much the character. So our second group is video game music. So you might recognize a few of the songs in there. Video game music is fantastic because developers are trying to immerse you in the video game, and the music is part of that. So when you are looking for a European city and you're sneaking around, look for music from Assassin's Creed. If you're trying to think of, okay, my PCs are exploring this open world and it's majestic and mountains, go listen to Skyrim. Go listen to Breath of the Wild. You're trying to figure out a puzzle and it's really fidgety. Go listen to Portal. You can pick and choose these games and see what the game is about, and more than likely the songs will reflect that and help drive your inspiration. So the three I have there are Dreams of Venice from Assassin's Creed, Peril, which is from the Halo series, and then Kingdom of Baron, which is from Final Fantasy. So those three songs are very character driven. The Dreams of Venice is it's a city-bound marketplace type of character who's wandering around the city. For me, Peril is out and about adventurer, kind of ranger type, and then Kingdom of Baron is very militaristic knight, royalty type figure. But again, you could draw either a hero or a villain from those. And my group three, I love my group three because these are pop songs, things you would hear on the radio, because you can pull inspiration from everywhere. First song is Chris Cornell, Nearly Forgot My Broken Heart, and it starts out with a lute type guitar beginning. So when I first found the song, immediately I thought of D&D. Immediately I thought of a bard, and then you start pulling from the lyrics, and a lot of the lyrics talk about memory. So for me, this character is a bard who is cursed with memory. He can't forget things. For me, that is extremely interesting. What has he been through that he's been trying to forget that he can't because he's cursed? Because you'd think having a good memory, that would be a good idea. Thinking in opposites. How does having this perfect memory where you're unable to forget stuff, how does that actually be a bad thing? Next one is Belgrade by Battle Tapes. That's a very kind of chaotic, energy driven. For me, it's not one character, it's two. These are goblin brothers or dwarves, people that love to work with explosives or are throwing potions everywhere. They're just going to run in and be chaotic, and it's that kind of driving energy. That third song is Paradise by Coldplay. I threw that one in because that's a bit more mainstream. Most people are familiar with it. When I listen to that song, there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of this motion, like it's magic based. And I immediately am picturing a magic estate university with a lot of stuff moving, a little bit of Hogwarts, but more motion, more clockwork, more spells that are going through the air. And you might say, wait a second, you said to describe a character. You're not describing a character, you're describing a place. Do not let what you need force you to not be inspired. If you're hearing or listening or seeing something and you're inspired to think of a place, think of that place, just like we talked earlier. Get that place figured out, and then you get that kaleidoscope. So I have this magic university that's very kind of mechanical combined with magic. Now I'm thinking of a character. Who's the person that lives there? Who's the person that works there? Who's the person that wants to live there? Who is the villain that was there and got kicked out? Who's the villain that lived there and left voluntarily? Those are the types of questions you can start asking yourself, but then you pull from your inspiration still, because you just turn on like this faucet and let it go. You're thinking of a place first, fine, think of a place, and then go into the detail that you need. Say you're looking for a character, ask that later. I'm not going to pause for questions because I want to keep going, but if you do have any questions, again, go ahead and put them in the chat. Carolyn will be collecting those, and we will go through them at the end of the session. And here's a cute little kitty for everybody with his cute little skeleton friends behind him. Another muse space is using images for inspiration. And growing up, I grew up on Magic the Gathering. I didn't play it a lot, but I spent a lot of time looking through my brother's cards. And there's a ton of art there. So I'm using that as a main example, because actually when they're building the cards, they will give the artist the description and just let them go and let them take that. And so we're kind of doing the opposite. So I'm going to give you a few links here in a second from the Magic the Gathering site. If you're not familiar with Magic the Gathering, they have a wonderful color system, magic system based on 5 main colors. They've done such a good job of developing it and why would you be one color instead of another. It's easily as detailed as like the Hogwarts houses of what would you be sorted into. So they put a lot of effort and energy into the world and the lore, and their pictures reflect this. So if you're looking at something like this for inspiration, it's like, okay, are you focusing on the character? Are you focusing on the cat that doesn't have pupils? Is this its true form? Is this somebody that can turn into things? Are they responsible for what's behind it? Are they a visitor, or are they somebody who showed up too late? Um, you look at these and you start building, again, depending on what you're looking for, what inspires you first, and then narrow in on that piece that you want. So again, I'm going to give you guys a few links. Again, try to stick to your group. I'm trying to make you guys stay within your lane, because that's going to force you to think outside the box, think in a different ways. You're not just playing to your strengths, you're playing to your weaknesses. And group 3, you had the more difficult songs, so I'm going to give you 3 links. Mostly because all these pictures are pretty cool. All right, I'll set a timer. Let me see how much more time we're doing. I'm going to give like 30 seconds for this. Just pick one. I have develop a place, location, or plot point. I'm flexible. Just kind of think, look at the picture, and whatever comes to you, go ahead and think through that. I'm going to give 30 seconds for that. And I'm going to mute. Okay, and it's going to go, well, that was 30 minutes, not 30 seconds. No wonder it didn't go off. So I'll pull up a few of these and just quick give my thoughts. So this is, let me accept cookies for a second. This could easily be a character, it could be a plot point, it could be something your PCs run into in the middle of the wilderness. This could easily be a character. Or maybe you don't find her, maybe you just find all the empty stuff behind her. Maybe she's a villain, maybe she's a hero. Very well defined. Clearly, this is how they travel, so it's a nomad society. She's most likely in charge. You're pulling that all from these very relatively simple images. Other one is here. Here's another one. This could be a monster they are fighting. I love homebrewing monsters. So then you have to think about, okay, so what is the green spell that they're casting? Hypothetically, the tree itself is alive with the green, so maybe it's not the tree that's the monster, maybe it's a character, druid type character, that's making the tree come alive. Maybe this is an attack that happens first, and then they talk to the tree and meet the character. How would your players interact with something like this? So again, it's just taking the image and asking whys as you're looking at it. Why are the eyes the same color as the hands, the green? So the magic, is it all connected? Maybe the spell was cast on the tree monster. So what is the green spell that's being cast on it? Where is it coming from? How was it built? Is it man-made? Is it a being of the forest? All of these types of questions you just start asking, kind of based off of this, and then again, build your kaleidoscope and work from there. I lost my place, so going down to my next one. I did want a quick note on imagery and GM screens. So I build my own GM screens. This is what they look like. It's super simple. Ooh. Super simple. I'm just taking pictures and pasting them on here. But this is then what is facing the players. So this kind of becomes part of the story then. I'm customizing it for what they are doing. In this case, this is for my Monster Hunter campaign. I told my players, think of a Monster Hunter character build, and you are being hired to hunt monsters. So then I put this out in front of them, and it has all these different things that they may or may not fight, but it kind of brings them into the world a bit. It's not just reliant on me to describe it. And then the other fun thing about it is when I went digital, I made a digital version, and now I've started deleting / destroying some of the creatures from it. I didn't tell them I was doing that. I didn't say anything, but we start on this screen and suddenly they're seeing all these scribbles and they're talking to each other, then working together as a team and building that connection with each other of, okay, what's going on? Why is stuff being scribbled out? Are we on a timeline? Blah, blah, blah. Here is another example of when I started for my Pathfinder campaign. It didn't get finished, but on the opposite side, I'm actually building the pictures up as we went through the campaign. So I started with very simple pictures of the characters, some backstory information, and then I'm adding pictures. So that builds up this collage of the player's story. So it's kind of this cool memory thing, like, oh, remember that part, remember this part. Plus you can reference it and point to it and say, oh, this is what it looks like. Instead of just making yourself do all the work, you're doing a lot of work already as a DM. So definitely count on existing pictures to kind of help you along the way. All right, here's a fun one. Use your surroundings. Everyone, look to your left. Right now, look to your left, wherever you are sitting. It doesn't even matter if you are facing a wall. I want you to create a character off of something to your left. Me, I have a white dish to my left. So I have Daisha, the white lady, and she is fragile. So what does that mean? Well, she could be physically fragile. She could have some kind of a sickness, so she has to be protected at all times. Maybe she's kept in a glass box of some kind and carried around when she travels. Maybe she's mentally fragile. If I start thinking mentally fragile, I'm thinking more of a villain. A white lady as a villain is a very interesting concept, and she wears she wears all white into battle so that the blood of her enemies shows on her clothes. Daisha, the warrior white lady, is the new villain of my next campaign because that sounds very interesting. Now I have a barbarian character, female, that wears all white for non-expected reasons. So the same thing if you look to your right, but this time think of items. Looking for items that your PCs might find in a shop. The example I gave you earlier, some of them might be magical, but this exact same thing happened to me. I was with my players in my house and they said, what else is in the curiosity shop? I looked over at my board game shelf and just started listing off. It's a sushi dish that's red and black from Sushi Go. It's a portrait with an Amazon picture, that's Small World. It's a statue of a sheep, that was Catan. And just start labeling stuff. And if you're subtle about it, PCs love being brought in on a joke. So they started realizing what I was saying and were kind of then playing along with it and make them part of the story more of the narrative. Like I said, you're going to have moments where you're just going to have to start pulling stuff out of the air, but you're not surrounded by air, you're surrounded by your house. And even if you looked to your right or to your left and you had a blank white wall, you can use that. Maybe everything in the shop is a piece of white brick. That's all the shop sells. It happens. It could happen in your world, and then think about why. Why would that even happen? It's and like I said, in hindsight, it sounds like kind of a dumb idea, but then you own it. Maybe all the shops are full of this white brick, and maybe they look different to different people. Maybe that's part of it. You have to have a certain talisman to actually see the item, something like that. Again, taking what's a dumb idea in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's a dumb idea, and building off of it and owning it and making it something worthwhile. Uh, Inspirations from curious items. So that's another muse. Going into secondhand stores, thrift shops, craft stores. So I found this ring. I knew I needed something that symbolized a magical clan. So I found this ring at a secondhand store, and that's how the Druids of the Eye came to be. They were an earth-based society, and that became their symbol. And I actually have the ring to give to my players when we're playing. They need that to get into the actual Temple of the Druids. Craft stores are fantastic for ideas, especially around the stationery area. Um, Keys like this that have words on them, or selections of words on the right side. So that is our next brainstorming task. Not going to group you guys. I'm just going to go ahead and let you pick something. Now this time, pick a dungeon room, a puzzle, a monster. Think of something that you would build based on one of these words. I'll give you a few seconds here to think about it. So for me, I had actually found this in a craft store and almost bought it right off the spot. Um, Again, because it was interesting to me to put my players in type of like a haunted museum or some type of a collection exhibit thing. The exhibit A, souvenir, expedition, things like that. You can also say salvage, so that's a monster that has all sorts of pieces, maybe from like a blacksmith shop where they throw away extra swords and stuff, and now this monster is being created from it. Souvenir. Maybe you have a villain who collects souvenirs, a la General Grievous when he takes Jedi swords. Exhibit A, having your players be held captive and put in a museum. Maybe your players are now Exhibit A themselves and have to figure out how to get out of the museum. So again, taking a word and building off of it. Now here's the fun thing with words. And I'm gonna copy this link and put it in the chat. This is what's called an emotion wheel. This is a lot of fun because it takes a word and then, let me expand this a little bit, and then narrows it down. So you might say, okay, my villain is angry. Well, what do you mean by angry? And you kind of go off to the side. And my villain is disrespected. Specifically, you're getting specific about it. Why are they disrespected? Because they did something and the town doesn't respect them anymore. Okay, what was that thing? They're disrespected. They're not ridiculed, though. So they're disrespected, but people are being respectful about their disrespect. Like they understood why the villain did the terrible thing. They're not being made fun about it. So you can take words and then find how you're describing your town, your character, your plot, your puzzle. Figure out what words you're using and say, why am I not using another word to describe it? What are the differences? And then again, ask yourself why. Another fantastic tool. GMs are artists, and you cannot convince me otherwise. We do so much. You're acting, you're creating, you're writing, you're probably drawing, you're building, you're doing so much. You guys are artists, plain and simple. So find inspiration from artistic communities. Inktober is a drawing prompt list that happens every year. So again, you're looking for a puzzle. I pull from that overgrown. Okay, my puzzle is going to be something involving plants that are constantly growing, and maybe trying to tangle up the players. The Yeehawgist I found randomly. I was like, okay, fantastic. My players are doing a normal fantasy-based thing, and they wander into a Western town. Pull ideas and such from that. Here's your next task. For brainstorming, these are prompts from an impromptu actor site that I'd found. So these are very kind of out of the box. So think of a dungeon room, a puzzle, or monster based on, shouldn't say that word, sorry, of one of these prompts. So again, I know we don't have a doobly. This is our final brainstorming prompt. Think of a dungeon room puzzle or a monster that your players might deal with using one of these prompts. Again, a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to go through some of these. So like watching yourself on video. In my mind, my players aren't in a sci-fi world, so they would have some type of a weapon, not weapon, item that allows them to see 3 seconds into the future or replay the last 4 seconds, something like that, where it allows them to re-see themselves, maybe in another room. It's not all there. I'd write it down anyway and move on and think of something else. Staying within the circle of expectations. Okay, so there's stuff on the floor and they have to stay in a certain number of circles. Maybe the solution is on the ceiling and your players have to talk and ask, are we looking at the ceiling ever? Looking at group twos. Uh, Changing pace. It would be we have players that have to do difficult terrain, so that halves their how far they can move. Reversing that would be making them go a lot faster. Suddenly your players move super fast. So are they going to run into walls and injure themselves? Or maybe they have to move a certain amount of squares, kind of like a chessboard, where you have the horses, they have to move a certain amount of movement, and now they have to navigate around a board using only that movement. Group 3, using costumes. That would be a lot of fun to have them try to sneak into places, making costumes and such. Gently decline ideas you don't like. My players are entering a town. The whole town is a puzzle where everybody is obnoxiously polite. Everybody's polite, so the players have to act that and be polite as well. And as soon as they say something negative, everyone in the town looks at them and is like, no one says that. So I now have to think of how would guards enforce politeness while being polite themselves? Probably with a lot of apologies, but that's, and thinking about that and just take, again, these are not designed for D&D at all, but it's me. All right, we will quick close this out then. So other random notes and ideas, picking a theme and forcing yourself to stick with it. A temple that is rooms and monsters are based on shapes. So what does it mean to have a triangular creature or a spherical puzzle room? That kind of, again, forces you to think in a different way that you would normally. Plus, players love it when they figure out themes. I found they really like enjoy it. It's like when you're reading a book and they pull in some type of pop culture reference. Players seem to have the same kind of idea. So when you have a theme and they figure it out, they appreciate that. Thinking in extremes. What is the most boring town that I can think of? And then either make it or make the opposite. Again, like we've talked about, the most boring town would have all of the houses the same. And then I'm asking, why is that the case? And there's a whole but different number of reasons why I can think about that. Being specific with words, we talked about this. Why is your character described with this word, but not another word that means the same thing, but is just a little bit different? And then being creative, even in your descriptions. So maybe your players are in a space where their perception is knocked way down. So your descriptions are only one words. So when they say, what's in the room? You say, stuff. And that's all you can say. Like you can literally only tell them one word at a time. I'd have to think about that. Obviously, you don't want to make your players discouraged. You don't want to make them angry and stuff. But an idea we're walking into it, they kind of know about it and they can continually ask. Yay!
I'll just ask it off of mute if you can hear me.
You're very quiet, but we're turning up our volume.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
We got you.
So my question is, do you always completely manufacture your campaigns, or do you ever see a module that you think is cool and be like, I'm going to use this framework and then expand?
Love that question. Every DM is different. I've had DMs that are very off the cuff and impromptu. I've had other DMs that build out calendars, worlds, and times, meaning the players went out for hours, specific hours, did jobs, then had to determine what time their jobs stopped so that they would all get together and work on the quest. So it really depends on you. My personal style is I make my objectives for what do I want my players to do, and I build enough of the world to kind of lead them there, but I let them take the reins. And part of that then lets them be creative, and I build off of their creativity. So my idea might be, okay, the players enter the town, they have to talk to person A, they have to get item number 5, and then they can go on their way. And I kind of know what the town is. I know how the town reacts to outsiders. I have a general reference in my mind of what the town looks like or how they're going to act. And then the players come in and they're immediately drawn to the ladies at the cart that are selling paper hearts. They want to know all about the paper hearts. Do you collect paper hearts? And how long is this? Is it festival? What kind of festival? How long is the festival been going on? And I'm just like, this has nothing to do with the game, but they're having fun. So okay, and maybe those people are going to guide them, and maybe okay, now this is the NPC that's going to help them. So for me, I do world building to allow me to impromptu decisions for the players. I do enough world building so that I can quickly answer their questions when they go decide to do something crazy, because we all know players like doing random crazy stuff.
Any other questions? You can also game with Amanda during Learn a Game. Both Amanda and Carolyn are going to be running games. That's exciting.
And is Amanda, are you running the For the Queen?
Yes.
For the Queen is a fantastic character brainstorming game. Amanda, I think you're in our group for that For the Queen thing, so I have not forgotten about that. Just we had a little bit of a worldwide pandemic happen.
Yeah.
So it kind of stalled everything, but that is still in my mind to do because it's still a fantastic creative exercise.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions.
Yeah, again, email Carolyn know if you have any. If you want to join us for Learn a Game, that'd be awesome as well. Sorry for